Hi all, welcome to week 14. We're moving right along here. This is the second to last um, week really of kind of material. Week 15 to be anthropology of time. And this week we're going to discuss a lot on development. This should actually be a pretty quick lecture. There's some reading and other video stuff, but there's also a quiz this week. So again, I try to balance things out where you're not having to totally do a lot of lecture when you have a quiz going on. Anyway, again, papers are going to be coming due here fairly shortly. So anyway, I have some students giving me a call or emailing me about paper topics. So if you need to do the same to discuss more, I think good feedback is coming out of the assignment for week 12. Yes, the research assignment in week 12, where I ask you to identify your theoretical orientation and the event that you will be looking at. I follow up with that post, and I've written a lot of people back. So I think that that's a lot of good feedback from me in terms of the research paper as well. So utilize that assignment, and that could help in terms of honing things down. We are definitely moving into go time in terms of the research paper. All right, so as terminology goes, development is a change directed toward improving human welfare, infrastructure, or economic efficiency. And the real question we need to be asking around development is who is really benefiting? In the video I asked you to watch, it's all about Texaco going into the Amazon and causing real health problems for people there. There's a lot of other videos. I had another video picked out. It gets pretty graphic. So I didn't want to kind of utilize that. I don't know that shock value's super needed in this human area. Really, when we go back to the idea of civilization and or monumental architecture and division of labor and some of these other issues we have, status, hierarchy, those kinds of things, I think it's always kind of a fascinating question to ask. What is development and what is its purpose? I think if development is intended to get someone rich, that is always going to play into other people losing out on something, whether it be resources or infrastructure or access to the environment or the commons. Development, let's say that we even have a good idea in terms of building a hospital in rural Amazon, right? So we can treat some of these diseases and our heart's in the right place. But what are those unintended consequences? What are those unintended consequences of that development? Now we've got roads leading to the hospital. We've got a clear forest, which could be somebody's home. So even though we have these like great ideas to help people, it might not actually help the people who we're trying to help. So I think looking through this kind of week, make sure that you're always questioning yourself around what development is and what is its purpose. Improving human welfare, that piece, I guess the hospital would kind of play in here to that component. Infrastructure or economic efficiency tend to be the other reasons for development. And really, a lot of times when we talk about development, we're talking about other groups of people. It could be other countries. It could be other multinational corporations who are gaining something out of this development. As another term, we need to look at poverty. Remember, in hunter-gatherer groups, they didn't have poverty, but also they weren't dealing with development because they didn't need to change anything, right? Like life was working. And poverty is defined as a lack of access to tangible or intangible resources that contribute to life and the well-being of a person, group, country, or region. In America, we have poverty. We don't talk about it as much as we used to, especially in the 60s. But again, are we going to create poverty out of development? And we'll get into that more as we kind of move through this lecture. Microcredit loans are small cash loans made to low-income people to generate support in income-generating ways. And I'll give you an example of a microcredit loan. It might be that the World Bank, I don't think the World Bank actually does microcredit loans, but they might be starting to move that direction. So the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, they and the World Bank kind of tend to be in this area. What they'll do is they'll give people, maybe an artisan like this person here, $20 to $200 to get their business up and running, and then they make the profits and they can basically sell their goods online or in a market. But it's basically to help. A lot of times it ends up being to help females. And they could be single females who have a talent or a trade, just to kind of get on their feet. So again, this is one of those things that also looks really, really good on paper, to help people, but also it can cause, debt now. They've got to pay back the loan. So now you're kind of tied into another structure that you weren't tied into. You may have, been making these things for like festivals or rituals, and now in order for you to make more money or start a business, you've commoditized them. So that's another aspect of this as well. Process of social change. This is a picture of Native Americans taken to a boarding school. This is how societies change, right? Number one, invention. And this could be a discovery of something new. This could be internal inventions. And a lot of these things happen somewhere, right? First, where maybe an individual creates something or a new technique or a new technology, and it's spawned kind of only in that individual instant. The other way that it happens is diffusion, and that's the spread of culture through contact. Now there's there's kind of four pieces of diffusion really. One is mutual borrowing. So a lot of times hunter-gatherer groups, Native Americans especially, they spread culture, and it could have been symbolic goods of like religious ideology, or how to plant corn, or use this technology, or try this fish hook. That was like mutual sharing. And this doesn't have negativity associated with it. Remember, it's reciprocal, so it's balanced kind of reciprocity, or generalized. It doesn't have that like unbalanced, out of whack kind of component. The second is more powerful to less powerful. And this could be education. Again, the boarding schools would be an example of that. At a micro level, they really match up with number three better. Again, more powerful to less powerful. There's a certain level of even like this class, what I'm doing currently, is more this number two range, right? Like I'm giving you grades. That, I guess that's the power that I'm kind of utilizing in this example. So I give you kind of grades, but you don't know the subject matter. And so it might be agreed upon that this is a positive thing and that we need to do this. But there is some power roles in that situation. Number three tends to be much more drastic, and the boarding schools actually fit better into this. Cultural imperialism. It's more forceful diffusion in the way of acculturation and assimilation. Deculturation and less powerful culture no longer has its own separate cultural identity. So this becomes an issue as well. And yeah, the boarding schools are perfect examples of that. And then four, the other form of diffusion is less powerful culture influences the dominant culture. So this is an interesting thing that could happen. I feel like it's happening a little bit with like K-pop or K-drama from Korea. Japan has had some influences on certain things in the Western world, even though we kind of tend to have more power. So maybe they're influencing music and or something else like that. Anyway, super kind of fascinating with regards to kind of that issue, right? And so these are the four pieces of diffusion. One being very mutual and not having power associated. Two's minor power, but we go into kind of the agreed upon structure of that power. Three is much more cultural imperialism, and then four is kind of the opposite, which is the less powerful having influence on the more powerful. Models of development. So modernization equals change marked by economic growth through industrialization, market expansion, political consolidation through the state, technological innovation, literacy, and options for social mobility. Modernizing, most countries in the world are modernizing, and a lot of times it's through market expansion, right? This has been kind of the imperialistic colonial model for a long time. We need to open new markets, so opening those markets in other places that aren't industrialized it tends to be kind of the focus here. Political consolidation through the state. This is again like more power in the hands of a few. Technological innovation can also be part of this modernization. Literacy and education tend to also correspond with these changes in terms of modernization. And the reason being is that it takes education and literacy in order to train a new workforce that will then have the jobs and can handle kind of going through this process. Growth-oriented development is induced change brought on by modernization theory. And there's the modernization theory, there's a couple of them around this kind of idea around neoliberalism. One is economic productivity in industry and agriculture. Two is reducing government expenditures on government programs like schools. And this is the neoliberal component where public goods in the commons are not valued. It has more to do with the value is put in private industry and private hands. Distributional development emphasizes social equity and social benefits. Universal healthcare and education believes that growth-oriented model leaves out issues of poverty and believes in the trickle-down approach. So this piece is kind of it's a critique of the growth-oriented development. What we do need to know is that the world is moving and has been moving toward a growth-oriented development strategy for a long time. It says 1980s, it's been longer. Ultimately, what it is a neo-expansion of imperialism in terms of new markets. And again, the distributional development emphasizes social equity, universal healthcare, universal education. This is going to be more apparent in places like Europe. Human development, investing in human welfare. This is the idea that we should be investing in people, and that their well-being will make us better as a group of people and or a civilization. Sustainable development, environmentally sound development and growth has harmed the planet. So this is the sustainability is a new kind of catchphrase for a lot of groups. And again, it's this environmentally sound piece. Like if we do build this building, that it needs to be green and produce its own energy with solar panels and all of this other stuff. Sustainability, I think, is utilized a lot as a term these days. And then one thing to point out, especially while we're kind of discussing development itself, is that there is an inherent male bias in development. Men are beneficiaries of development and project. Ultimately, a lot of these projects disregard the impact of women's role and status. So again, whether that be leaders of states, of industrial nations, whether it be leaders of industry, most of the time, those people and those agreements are coming out of a male bias, or males doing the negotiating and doing the business. So it leaves out the female perspective a lot of times. And again, I would say that the male component to all of this is kind of woven through this civilization time period where men have really kind of moved into these power roles over females. And really, what it does is it moves towards this binary structure of like man and woman, right? And what are our roles? And the male has the power and the female doesn't. And that's not really where humans are coming from, from kind of our past, right? The 250,000 years of experience on this planet was not engulfed in this kind of binary structure. It was much more fluid. If you recall our gender discussion, there was fluid gender roles as well in a lot of these groups. So looking at these development strategies, keep those things in mind.